Welcome to Writing Black Joy Season 2. I am Sophia Robinson, and I'm a writing coach and an editor and a story listener, as well as the producer of Writing Black Joy, a virtual space that celebrates, centers, and promotes the voices of Black writers and storytellers with joyful and uplifting stories. Here, you'll find conversations with some of my favorite Black writers and storytellers, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, hear more about their creative process, and find inspiration for your own creative ventures, as well as tips and strategies for writing poetry, blogs, creative nonfiction, fiction, plays, and so much more from all types of writers, as well as a sneak peek into the writing life. You could even find your next favorite writer, book, poem, play, or blog. And if you are a Black writer who is looking for a coach or an editor to help you bring your joyful story into the world, then click on my website below to find out how to work with me. In the meantime, let's go to today's guest. Today's guest is Dawn Michelle Hardy, and she is the Literary Lobbyist. Dawn is a creative publicity strategist and a staunch advocate for self-published and traditionally published authors. She works closely with literary agents, editors, sales and publicity representatives, and publishers to conceptualize, execute, and track marketing campaign successes. Dawn and I talked about the importance of audience building and several ways you can do that, whether you write fiction or nonfiction, even memoirs. We also talk about self-publishing versus traditional publishing and how to make that decision, as well as the importance of editing, no matter how you're publishing, how to find an agent, how to increase your chances of finding an agent, the landscape of the publishing industry for Black writers and creatives, and so much more. Dawn also talked about a new initiative coming out of the Literary Lobbyists, which is a speakers bureau that brings Black writers and writers of color to speak at historically Black colleges and universities so that creatives can learn more about the publishing industry and the opportunities within it. Now, this conversation is chock full of strategies and advice for writers who want to publish and put their books out into the world. And that's whether you want to have a traditional publishing contract or whether you want to self-publish. And remember, if you want to write a book and you want to work with me as a writing coach or an editor, then head over to my website. Obviously, the link is below in the show notes, and take a look at my services or reach out to me on Instagram. Just go over, follow at Writing Black Joy, drop me a DM, and I'll be happy to chat to you about it. Don't forget to hit subscribe, whether you are on YouTube, whether you're in your podcast app, and also subscribe to my newsletter and get me in your inbox. It's like getting email from an old friend. Now, on to my conversation with Dawn, and I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy. I'm Sophia Robinson, and I'm writing coach and an editor, and I'm your host, bringing you this podcast, YouTube channel. It's on all kinds of places now, folks. So podcast, YouTube, and on the website. And in case you've wandered on here, Writing Black Joy is a platform where we celebrate and center Black storytellers with joyful stories. Although today I have with me somebody who has a very similar mission, and I'm so happy to bring you Dawn Michelle Hardy. I met Dawn through season 1 guests. I have 2 season 1 guests that I met Dawn through. One was Javacia. So I'll drop her link in the comments to her interview. And there was also
Jacqueline Holness.
Right. Mm-hmm. So there was also Jacqueline Holness, who is a novelist that I also interviewed in season 1. So I'm going to drop her link in the show notes as well. But Dawn is here today, and Dawn is actually the literary lobbyist. So she is a creative publicity strategist and staunch advocate for self-published and traditionally published authors. She works really closely with literary agents, editors, sales and publicity representatives, and publishers to conceptualize, execute, and track marketing campaign success. For 20 years, Dawn has developed and facilitated multimedia publicity campaigns that drive sales, create fan bases, and land lucrative multi-book deals, garner book awards and industry honors that help leverage the author's success for on-screen opportunities, corporate sponsorships, and paid speaking engagements. So Dawn is the partner that you have when you are an author, you've written a book, or you're, almost to the end of the book, and you want somebody to help you put that book out into the world, which is so important. So important. I self-published a book a couple of years ago, and I can tell you, writing a book and putting the book out into the world are two whole different skill sets. We have so many authors that have come on the show, and I really wanted to bring Dawn on so we can talk a little bit about what to do next, because sometimes that's a bit of a minefield. So thank you so much for joining me, Dawn. So happy to have you. And I'd love for you to tell us a bit about your work. Obviously, you're a publicist, you're a literary agent, you're a publishing consultant, all the things. I'd love to know, first of all, how did you even get into doing this work?
Oh my goodness, well, Sophia, thank you so much for having me on. I'm always tickled when someone wants to interview me, because I'm like, I don't have a book, but I can talk to you about tons of books. I just haven't authored any. So thank you so much for having me on. Honestly, I'm in this publishing industry by divine destination. Like, I worked in fashion. I got my education in college in fashion. And when I was in the process of transitioning, trying to figure out, I don't want to do fashion anymore, a colleague had recommended me to be a personal assistant to author Terry Woods. She wrote True to the Game.
Yes.
So, and that was at that, when urban fiction, over the next few years, urban fiction took over African-American publishing. So I was her assistant for 2 years. And during that time, I basically did everything except write the books: edit, proofread, cover concept, marketing, getting street vendors the book, bookstores the book. So I did everything, and I really enjoyed it. But what I enjoyed the most was the publicity and promotion. So actually helping her set up events, getting her media opportunities, that was the fun part for me. So I worked with her for 2 years, and then I started my own PR agency, and basically sent out one e-blast saying the talent behind Terry Woods is now starting her own PR agency to help self-publish. At the time, it was self-published urban fiction authors, because those were the only authors I really knew personally. And then it kind of took on a life of its own. And I've been in business now 17 years independently, a total of 19 and a half, if you include the time that I was with Terry. And 90% of my clients come from referrals.
Oh, that is just incredible. I love that so much. And, I think I can't, I can only speak as a writer, as an author. I think for a lot of writers and authors, that the writing process is more of a natural process to us. It comes a bit more naturally, the writing, you have the ideas, that creative process, but the sort of the different skill set that's required to start the publicity, to kind of put it out there, maybe, doing some sort of negotiation, that type of thing. I think quite often we don't even know where to start with that. And so we don't necessarily make the most of the opportunities that we could have, because we don't even know about them. Right. Yeah. So I love that you are doing this work. So what type of, you said you started out obviously with urban fiction, but do you work with any types of writers now? Is there anyone specific that you work with?
Oh, yeah. So over the year, it diversified. I started with urban fiction. So I worked with Miasha, I've interviewed Quan, I know Wahida Clark, J.M. Benjamin, so all Shannon Holmes, so all the really, Danielle Santiago, all the really notable, I would say top 10, top 15 urban fiction authors. But then 8 years into doing PR, I wanted to diversify. And I had worked with an author who, her name is Sadiqa Johnson, and her debut book, she self-published, called Love in a Carry-On Bag. And she had actually been a publicist at Penguin Random House.
Wow.
But she was self-publishing her book. So again, when you are in the author seat, even though she had PR experience, she was an author. And she just was like, you know what, I need to hire somebody, because I don't know if I could do PR for myself in that regard. So her project was so successful, and I compared it to Love Jones and Mo Better Blues. And from that, I was like, you know what, I want to work more. So now transition from urban fiction, which was kind of fizzling out, to contemporary women's fiction.
Okay.
So set in, modern day, things that you would see on TV now, like Harlem, Sex and the City,
Yeah.
Run the World, those type of shows. So college educated career women, having issues with family, love, finances, and things of that nature. So I basically diversified my portfolio with that. And then I became a literary agent in 2011 because I wanted to do nonfiction. And I wanted to diversify, work with some people that weren't necessarily people of color. Again, just to have a diversified, book list. So I've worked on sports biographies, which I'm an avid sports fan. When I'm not doing book stuff, it's all about the ball. It's football, it's basketball. Like I'm very much into professional sports. So I did a book on Allen Iverson with a writer from the Washington Post. I did a book on the New York Jets, the Seattle Seahawks, and these are teams that I genuinely like to watch. And then I've done a few essay collections as well. So now my list consists of poetry, essay collections, children's books, fiction, nonfiction, self-published, as well as traditionally published. Yeah. And several memoirs, both self-published and independently.
Perfect. And in terms of being a literary agent, is that specifically for people who want to traditionally publish?
Yes. If you are looking for a literary agent, it's because you do not want to self-publish and you want to get a book deal and have somebody else take the helms on that. That's the only reason why you would need a literary agent.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about that later in terms of even making that choice. But I'm curious, obviously, this is all about writing Black joy, and I'd love to know your thoughts on joyful stories by Black writers about Black characters. Maybe they're, fictional characters, or maybe it's even the biographies, the memoirs. Why do you think it's important to have joyful Black stories out in the world?
Oh my goodness. Simply because, like, in humanity, we have our ups and downs, but it's not always bad. And there's definitely, I feel like in every person's life, there's definitely more happy, joyful moments than heartbreaking ones. And so to me, when you write a book, you're leaving a legacy. That book will outlive you. Somebody will have it in a used bookstore. Your publisher will continue to print it, but your book will outlive you. So the doom and gloom is always recorded in history. But I feel like for the generations to come after us, they need to see our wins. They need to see our successes. They definitely need to see us in love. They definitely need to see us celebrate the birth of a baby, go on vacation, win the promotion, and just living a good life, because that really is indicative of the lives that we live. And I feel like if you're leaving too much of the negativity behind, what kind of level of hope are you leaving for the next generation? So to me, writing about Black joy is mandatory if you are a writer at some point in time, because you want people to be able to read that and find hope and inspiration from that. They're not going to find hope and inspiration, from stories about genocide.
Constantly, exactly. And
and racial divide. So it's like, okay, can we sprinkle that in with a little bit of sunshine and sprinkles?
Because at the end of the day, like, that's, as you said, it's not one of the guests I interviewed recently, but her interview is probably going to be after yours. We were talking about Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and like having that single story out there of like, this is what the experience is, or this is what the Black experience is, the doom and the gloom, and it doesn't really build an understanding of a group of people if the only story you've heard about them is this one thing.
Right. So, it's just such a horrible thing. I mean, even working with some of my contemporary women's fiction authors like Jacqueline Holness, Tia Williams, Sadiqa Johnson, all of their books all have what those three authors' books have in common: The Perfect Find, Destination Wedding, and Love in a Carry-On Bag. Is they all center around a woman and her love relationships. While she has career and family and other things going on, like what threads those three books together, me being the publicist for all three books, is that the woman is in pursuit of like the ultimate love. I'm a hopeless romantic. And I love to see that. I love to see when two people initially connect and there's butterflies and they're happy in love. Those type of stories make me excited. Those type of movies make me excited. So when you only see statistics, about women not being able to get into a relationship because they've chosen career and things like that, that's not the only narrative that we should be sharing. And that's when I talk about Black joy. It's like, yes, career women may have a hard time getting into love relationships and fertility issues and things of that nature. But then when they do, I feel like there's not enough recorded on the happiness and the celebration of when they do. So I like to work on books where the woman does find love in whatever form that may be, but ultimately she finds love. When I read Love in a Carry-On Bag by Sadiqa Johnson, I finished the book at like 1 a.m. And I remember texting her and saying, I'm ready to fall in love again. Have a good night. Because by the time I got to the last page, that's generally how I felt. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm ready. I want to be in a relationship
love that.
again.
Yeah, now I want to read
at
that.
At 1 o'clock in the morning, for somebody to text you at 1 o'clock in the morning, like, I'm ready to fall in love again. What are you talking about? Yeah, because after the last page of your book, I was like, oh, I want that.
Yeah.
And what it did for me, it is done for other readers. And that's why we need those Black joy narratives.
Okay, I love that. So I'm going to check out that book. I might even drop the link in the show notes.
Yeah, Love in a Carry-On Bag by Sadiqa Johnson. It was her first book. Like I said, if you love Love Jones and Mo Better Blues, you will definitely love Love in a Carry-On Bag.
That I'm going to be looking for that. That's going to be my well, right now it's December we're recording this, but that's going to be one of my holiday.
Listen, I know everybody has a TBR to be read list that's like this high.
Mine too. So I love that. Yeah. I've been asking every guest to share a quote. Either it could be from one of your clients or just a quote that's really meaningful to you. And tell me a bit about what you love about this quote.
Oh, you know what? Oh my gosh, I have the perfect quote. I can paraphrase it.
That's fine.
It's from an author, Darby Baham, in her debut book, which comes out in January 2022. It's called The Shoe Diaries. But in the quote, she's a shoe addict and she's going out on a date with a guy for the first time. And it's raining. And so he looks, she's dressed, her outfit is put together. So he looks down and says, oh, the forecast calls for rain. She's wearing suede shoes. And she basically says, you know what? I'm throwing caution to the wind. So weather be damned, I'm wearing the shoes. And what I like about that particular quote from the book is that we sometimes are waiting for the perfect moment. We're waiting for all the stars to align, for the sun to shine on our face at this exact moment. And I find that when you keep waiting, thinking that, oh, I'm not going to go to Paris until I have a relationship or until I'm with my husband, but you don't even have a boyfriend. So like, we're waiting for these moments in our lives to become perfect before we wear the dress, before we wear the shoes, before we take a certain trip to a destination. And meanwhile, life is passing us by.
Yeah.
And so for me, what I got from that is basically like, live your life in the moment, because one, tomorrow isn't promised, but then two, you get to have more than one good day. Yes. You get to have more than one good date, whether that's one good first date or numerous dates with that same individual. But who's to say that you only get one opportunity for a happy moment or a good trip or a perfect outfit? Like, that's not realistic. So what I got from that quote is, her saying, listen, weather be damned, I'm wearing the shoes. Yeah. Yes, ladies, wear the shoes. Wear the shoes. Wear the shoes, wear the dress, take the trip, because you're waiting for a perfect storm that's not really going to happen. Like, you're actually in it, but it doesn't look perfect to you. So you're like, oh, no, I'll pass on this one. And here's an example. I worked with an author who wrote a memoir. She was 32 years at the time. She'd been to, I don't know, over 20 countries. And her passion was she really wanted to go to Paris. She hadn't been to Paris yet. She was like, Dawn, I'm only going to go to Paris when I'm with my husband. That's the place I want to go to with my husband. But she wasn't even in a relationship. And she wasn't even actively dating at the time. And then maybe about 2.5 years ago, national news that Notre Dame in Paris caught on fire.
I remember.
Now I've been to Paris and I have a picture of myself in front of Notre Dame. So now that picture that I have, the building no longer looks the same, because they're trying to figure out how to build it up, if they even have the right materials. And I sent her a message and I said, see, Paris is burning. Take the trip. So you're not, you put off for years going to Paris because you want to go with your husband. But meanwhile, things are happening and you're missing it. Now that building is no longer the same as it was when I went. Go take the trip. You can always go back when you have a husband. So it's those type of things, like, pursuing opportunity in the moment, and because perfection really doesn't exist.
No. And I always call that saving life for a special occasion. It's like, you cannot save life for a special occasion. Like, this is life right now. Every day
Listen,
is a special
that's
occasion.
a bumper sticker. Don't save life for a special occasion.
Totally agree with that. Oh, I love that so much.
So that'll be my favorite quote.
Yeah, I love that. I would love to talk a bit about writing and publishing. Now,
Yeah.
like I said, a bit later, we're going to talk a little bit about even making that decision about how to publish. But before that, I want to talk about audience building, because I don't care if you are traditional publish, self-publish, having a blog, doesn't matter. I think that building that platform, building up that audience is so key to having people to read your book when you put it out there into the world. And so I'd love to chat a little bit about that. So first of all, because I know people probably may come to you by the time they've already written the book, when do you think it's a good time to start building an audience? Do you think it's like when you start writing? Do you think you wait until you're finishing the book? Like, when do you think it's a good time to start that process?
So here's the thing. So when it comes to nonfiction, if you decide you want to do a book on like relationships or diversity and inclusion, more than likely what inspires you to want to write a book about that is because you're already doing the work, and people have come to you with questions or engaging you in conversation around the topic that you're already talking about. So whether you have a relationship blog or you're a diversity inclusion officer at a company, you're already having those conversations in rooms. There's just no book. So a lot of times when you're doing nonfiction, the book idea comes from the work that you're actually already doing 5 days a week. So you're actually building a platform because you're already doing the work. So anybody who's following your relationship blog, that's now an audience that when you have a relationship book, those would be some of the first people that would support you because they've been following you for years and they love the relationship advice you give on your blog. Same thing if you're D&I, you can then go back to certain companies that you've been a guest speaker at, and now you have a book in the back of the room that when you leave the podium, you can still leave your words and wisdom behind in the book. When you're doing fiction, I still say it's the same thing. Once you decide what kind of story you want to write, the genre. I'm writing a children's book, a novel, fantasy, whatever it is. At that point in time, you need to start finding out who are the people that would be interested in reading this book. So even while you're writing it, you need to figure out like, okay, what blogs are they on? What writing groups are they a part of? Are they on Goodreads? Are they on a platform called Wattpad? And the reason for that is even during your writing process, maybe you may get to the point where you need a beta reader. You can then go to some of those people that already like to read fantasy and ask them to become beta readers. Why? Because they read so much fantasy already. So they can give you an honest answer because they're already immersed in that genre. So whether you're doing fiction or nonfiction, I always tell people you should be creating a platform either while you're writing the book or once you decide that you want to write a book and you know what you want to write it on. So even if a person is doing a memoir about parenting.
So I was going to ask, if you were doing a memoir.
So even if a person's doing it, so now memoir, that's about your life. So it's like, okay, how do I build a platform around talking about something that happened to me? Once again, everything is in the category. So I worked with a woman, Marianne Howland, and her book is called Warrior Rising. And it was basically about how she, as a single mom, got 4 men to serve as lifelong mentors to her son, because by the age of 13, she realized that as a mother, she could not teach her son how to be a man. She needed men to do that. So she went to other men. So with her, in that case, telling her and her son's story, because he was born premature and things of that nature, but also just serving on parenting platforms and mommy blogs, sharing the story of her and her son, because there are a lot of single mothers who have sons. And at that puberty age, you're at the fork in the road where you're like, okay, I'm about to yoke this little one up by the collar because I don't know what to do, because that's really the season where a man really needs to step in. And because but you may not know how to execute that.
To do that. And because boys look to men for that example. So yes, you're their mother and you're providing a great, you think a great foundation, but they're looking at you and they're like, but I'm not gonna be a woman, I'm gonna be a man. What are men doing? So that's the time that intervention. I gotta buy that book for some people.
Oh my God, listen, and she gives so many resources, and they did a rite of passage ceremony and everything. So in her building her platform, one, she was already a professional woman, and people knew her story about her son because he was premature and things of that nature. And that she was a single mom. So it was a really rough journey in those first few years of being single, being a professional woman, being the breadwinner, but having a son who has illnesses and handicaps. And so people knew the evolution of her story. But again, you can share your personal story with people that you know along the way. And then when it was time for her book to come out, she did Parenting Magazine. She did a lot of mommy blogs and podcasts and things of that nature to basically share the advice. So even with her, you're not the only single woman with a son. So what you need to do, her content was basically sharing her journey as a single mother and offering advice. And again, that was something she was able to do once she decided, I want to share my story. And also part of her book idea came from sharing it with people and people saying, oh my God, Marianne, you really should write a book.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't necessarily one day I'm going to write a memoir about what me and my son went through. As people got to know her in business and nonprofit settings and just her living her life, and the same thing with her son, they were so impressed by what she had done as a mother that people would say, you totally should write a book about this.
Yeah.
And then comes the memoir.
And that's what grew.
But you definitely need to, every author, whether it's poetry, children's book, whatever it is, you need to be working on building a platform while you're writing the book, or even before, simply because you can't get a literary agent if you don't have a platform. And you can't get a traditional publishing deal without a platform. And if you say, okay, well, I don't want either one of those, I'm going to self-publish, you still don't have the audience that's going to buy the book because you haven't taken the time to build a platform. So when you don't build a platform, I describe it as going into an auditorium, stepping onto the stage, getting into the mic and preparing to give a presentation, but there's nobody in the room.
Wow.
So your PowerPoint is ready to go.
Yeah.
You look beautiful, but there's absolutely no one in the auditorium except for you, because you never took the time to let people know that I have knowledge and I speak on this particular topic and I'm going to be speaking on this particular day. So you just showed up with your book and saying, okay, I'm ready to talk about it.
Yeah.
To who?
Didn't invite anybody into the room. And you, like, I know you obviously said this, but I just want to reiterate this. You think this also applies to fiction writers who even want to get a traditional publishing deal? Because I know a few fiction writers who, have been looking for agents for a while, but I think they were so focused on the writing process that
so with fiction, here's the thing. So if you're writing, a book like Destination Wedding, her platform, Jacqueline Holness, her platform in writing Destination Wedding was that she was already just writing.
She has a very busy blog. She blogs.
Right. So she has a blog. She had done nonfiction stuff, but she also interviews celebrities and stuff like that. Yes. So even if you're writing fiction, at that point, it's really just getting your name out there for people to say, oh yeah, I remember that article, or for you to share and say, here's a sample of my writing, here are 3 interviews that I did in 2018. So it's really writing and getting it out there for somebody to see. And like I said, most times people start with blogs, but there are platforms like Medium and Thrive Global where you can set up platforms and your own page and write there where there's already a community, so more eyes are on it. But you really need to have your writing out there. It's not about have you publish other novels. Maybe you submit for short story competitions, which is really helpful when you're writing a novel, because if you win, the publisher is definitely going to put, winner of the 2017 short story fiction prize, for whatever. They will put that in your bio or put that somewhere in your press materials.
They love that.
And
And in other platforms, I know there's one called Vocal. I have a client who writes for Vocal, and she writes a lot of her fiction on Vocal. And the other thing, which I think is interesting, is there are a lot of podcasts out there. Like there are podcasts for romance novel.
Absolutely. Podcasts have become like a gem. I remember a friend of mine, she's been in the podcast maybe now like 7 or 8 years or so. And she was one of the first people that I knew that was avidly listening to them. But because there's a podcast on pretty much every subject under the sun, those podcasts they are building an audience for people to tune into their show. So by you being a guest, just like what we're doing now, by you being a guest on that podcast, whoever is already following your series will now get to know about that particular author. So even doing podcasts before the book comes out and just sharing the journey or sharing the subject matter in which your book is going to be about, that's a way of building an audience. People just need to know that you exist and that you like to talk about certain topics that ultimately will be topics in your book.
Yeah, I think those are some great ideas. And so hopefully listeners will get some ideas for their own projects. So thinking about publishing now, I know you're a literary agent, but you also work with self-published authors. So $1 million question, how do I decide if I'm going to do traditional or do self-published? I love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, I feel like that is the number one question in the last 20 years. The last 20 years, that's the number one question. Here's the thing, it's about your ultimate goal. Like, why are you writing this book to begin with? Are you a PhD candidate and you're writing this book because you need this on your CV and career-wise it's going to be a bump for you and you want to do speaking engagements? Are you writing this simply because you've always had the dream of writing and you just want to see the book out? Are you writing a book about your grandmother because you want to have it at her 100th birthday at the family barbecue? So you first got to figure out, why am I even doing this? Because this is not something that any of us has to do. So if you're writing a book, it's something you want to do, not something you have to do. So once you decide on why you're writing it, ultimately that is going to determine, okay, how soon do you need the book available? And then what resources do you have? Because if timing is of the essence for you, then self-publishing is going to be the best option, because traditionally published books take about 18 months minimum on average, 18 months to anywhere between 2.5 years, depending on the type of book. So if you want something coming out summer of 2022, self-publishing is the only option on the table as of December 2021.
Right now, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there is no other way to get the book out that fast. So ultimately decide, why am I even doing this? Do I want to publish a book because I'm a good writer? I have bylines in Cosmo and Elle and, medium.com. And now I basically want to get my work out there and I want to get a big deal and people know me and I want a $100,000 deal so I can buy a house. There's no right or wrong answer. And so I always ask authors, well, first tell me why you even want to write the book, because ultimately that's going to determine which road you take.
Yeah.
But money and time are two factors that if you decide to self-publish, having the time and then having the money and the resources to actually publish properly.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you choose traditional, you'll get a literary agent, but that can take months. That could take a year sometimes. And then that agent then has to turn around and start pitching the project. And that's going to be some more months. And then you get the deadline and contract to actually work on the book. That's another year. So if you go traditional, it's because you have 2 to 3 years to wait it out.
Yeah. And I suppose it's important to note that it costs money if you're going to self-publish. I mean, there are people out there talking about, you can just throw it up on Amazon in 2 weeks or whatever.
No, because there's 2 billion items on Amazon. How do I know that your book is on there?
Exactly. And how do you know it's on there? B, quality, right?
Yes.
To me, you want a book that's good quality, get it edited. I belong to
a strong cover design.
Covers, everything like that. I belong to a group of editors, and I'm also going to be chatting to a couple of editors as well, because I think I've met a lot of writers who are almost afraid of the editing process, who think that they're going to lose their voice and they're going to lose themselves in the process. But it's like, you can't edit your own book because you're too close to it. So the key is picking the right editor, but then there's going to be a cost for that, right?
Yeah.
So,
I want to share, for those who are like, oh, I don't know if I want somebody to edit my work. I have a great story. So Sadiqa Johnson, the author of Love in a Carry-On Bag, like I said, she self-published that first book. She went through 9 rounds of edits with her editor. 9 rounds. Again, this is somebody who had already worked at Penguin Random House. So she worked with B.B. Moore Campbell, T.D. Jakes. So she wasn't new to the publishing experience. She just was a publicist who now was self-publishing a book. But she went through 9 rounds of edits. And when I worked with her, I always had her share that story. I said, because think about it. If you go through 9 rounds, by the time you get to 3 or 4, you're probably thinking, okay, this is great. I'm done. And then your editor comes back to you with round 5. And you're like, oh, okay. You get through round 5. Then she comes back, okay, so we need 6. By 6, you're kind of looking at her like, all right, now you're starting to get on my nerves. You go through 6, she comes back with 7. By the time she comes back after 7, you're definitely probably cursing her out. And you still go to 8. And then ultimately 9 is where she says, okay, now this book is ready for market. 9 rounds. But you know what? Sadiqa wound up winning 3 awards for that book. Her writing improved. Her writing to me was already great, but her writing improved so much from those that when she started working on her second book, that same editor, when she finished editing that book, she said, wow, your writing has improved. This book is so great. Let me share this with a friend of mine who's a literary agent. I think we can get you a deal. And Sadiqa was already determined and prepared to self-publish book number 2, but she never had to. That book number 2 was picked up by a literary agent. It went in an auction, which means that more than one publishing company wanted the book. And the book came out in hardcover, and the book was called Second House from the Corner. And she was published with Thomas Dunn, which is a division of St. Martin's. And then her next book came out after that, and then there was me. And then her most recent book that came out in 2021, her first historical fiction, The Yellow Wife. So she's had 3 books, 2 in auction, simply because she went through 9 rounds of edits and became a better writer after self-publishing book number 1. Yeah. So she's the ultimate success story I share when it comes to embrace the editing process. Your editor is going to make you a better writer.
Yeah.
And now her life is completely changed. Her historical fiction was voted by Oprah Daily as one of the best historical fiction books of 2021.
Which is
she couldn't have dreamed that when she was going through round 5.
Round 5 and round 6. And I think that's the thing, like, it's not just about being able to write. I think editing really does improve your writing. It improves your how you phrase things, how you
articulate yourself,
how you, the order in which you put things. It could be a developmental edit, it could just be copy editing. I think you need that outside lens of a professional who knows what they're doing to really.
And it's developmental editing is what every author needs, because whatever your first draft is, whatever your second and third draft is that you do on your own, by the time you send it to an editor, they're looking at it, and their whole job as a developmental editor is, how can I make this a better reading experience?
Yes.
Not for you, but for the people that you wrote this book for. So whatever their criticism is, they're a fresh set of eyes. And they're like, oh, you know what? This is good, but you should have mentioned this earlier on in the book. I feel like if we would have known this, we would have been rooting for this character more had we known this earlier in the story. By this point, people, aren't loving your protagonist, but it's simply because they didn't have empathy, because they didn't know this fact. So you should probably move that up to the beginning. So that's what developmental editors do, is to help make your work a stronger version of itself for a better reading experience.
Yeah. And the other thing I will say, as just from the perspective of an author, is that sometimes you don't know you think you know what the book is about when you start writing, and by the time you get to the end, the book is about something entirely different. And to me, I know it sounds crazy, right? But it's so true. And I think that is, sometimes you forget, you've kind of gone through that process, but the reader is not going through that process with you. The reader is picking up fresh. And so the editor is there to say, okay, you started the book talking about one thing and you ended the book talking about something else. How can we bring this together? How can we make this coherent? How can we make this cohesive? And you don't know that because you've already traveled
in your mind.
In your mind, exactly.
So even when it comes down to like the last stage of editing, which is like, proofreading and just having people proofread, even with that process, because you've been with the book from day one, you know that this author's, that the protagonist's name is spelled a certain way, or that this town is spelled a certain way. So you begin to read it and see it correctly because it's in your mind. You know what it's supposed to be, even if it's not that on the page. So you need proofreaders because they're fresh eyes, and they're like, okay, well, did you mean to spell her name with a Z instead of an S? In your mind, you know how it's spelled, so you see it spelled correctly, and only a proofreader is able to bring that to your attention, like, okay, is this a typo or is this intentional? And you're like, oh no, that was a mistake. but you didn't see it as a mistake. You and I can sit at the same desk and go page by page and circle all the errors, and we won't have the same thing circled. You're not going to circle what I circle simply because you're reading it correctly, because in your mind you know what it's supposed to be, but on the paper I'm seeing what it is, and it's not what you thought it was. And that's what proofreading is about. Making sure that whatever's in the author's mind is actually on the page, because you will read things correctly simply because you know what it's supposed to be. And that's why every book in print has a typo in it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Every book in print. I remember when I became a literary agent, someone told me that. They was like, no, Dawn, like, because it's, we're humans. And people can go over a book 1,000 times. It's the human eye and the human brain, and there's a disconnect at a certain point. So every book has a typo in it. But again, the as few typos as possible, it just makes for a better reading experience. So even hiring someone to proofread, or having a team of friends or beta readers proofread, really is your last line of defense to say, okay, the book is written well. We had developmental editing. We went line by line and made sure that every sentence in the book makes sense. Because again, if you're writing a paragraph, you know the gist of the message in that paragraph. But now if you read each line, does each sentence in that paragraph actually make sense? Because the paragraph might make sense. Like, oh yeah, okay, wow, that was their first date. But if you go line by line, what does the third sentence really mean? What are those words that you put together?
And I will tell you.
What does that third sentence mean? And that's line editing.
And that's line editing.
The third sentence in your paragraph doesn't make sense. What are you trying to say here?
And one thing I will say, I discovered that I've been blogging for a few years now. And when I started doing audio recordings of my blogs, all of a sudden I realized I'd written something and I'm like, this doesn't even make sense. And that was me picking it up from my own writing. So imagine.
You're like, wait a minute. You're like, pause. What did I write here? And you're confused because you don't even know how to ad-lib. You're like, nope. Okay, what was I trying to say?
I had to pause, I had to delete it, I had to rewrite it, and that is my own work. So I think how much more is an outside view, an outside lens going to pick up? So I think those are really, really important things for someone to consider. But then going back to that decision of like traditional versus self-publishing, there's cost to that. If you want a good editor who's going to do a good job with developmental editing, you want a good proof, there's a cost to that, and you have to be willing to foot that sort of cost. I'm curious, I'd love to know a bit more about getting an agent. It always sounds like this mysterious thing that you were talking about. So I'm just
people think it's like the Wizard of Oz. It's
like
not.
The Wizard of Oz. I'm gonna get an agent. Like, I'm gonna go to follow the yellow brick road. Like, what? Tell me about that.
So if a person is looking for an agent, there's a platform called Publishers Marketplace. So publishersmarketplace.com. There's also a platform and a magazine called Poets and Writers. So I think Poets and Writers is pw.org is their website. Both of those. And then if you're on Twitter and you put in hashtag MSWL, which stands for Manuscript Wish List, those are places where you can find editors and agents, more specifically agents, in all three of those platforms. So finding an agent, ultimately the job of an agent, if I represent you, is I already believe in your work. And then my job is to pivot and find you and I a publishing partner that will publish your book. However, as an agent, I only am financially compensated after we get you a deal. I get 15% of whatever advance I get for you. Right. Therefore, I might be working with you for weeks, months, years before I get one penny. So therefore, I always tell people, make sure that you understand that your agent is advocating for you and they're not being compensated. So they believe in you and they're going to make calls and emails and meetings for free because they believe that they can sell your work. So it's always important for people to recognize that your agent is your number one advocate that can actually do something for you. Because maybe your mother, your spouse, or your best friend are advocating for you, but they can't help you.
So they can't help
you.
So
and your agent is your advocate that actually is industry connected to help you get a deal. But again, if I'm only getting paid when I sell a book, I need to know that your writing is strong. If you're writing fiction, if you're doing nonfiction, that your writing and your platform and your idea are strong and well executed, because I have to pitch that. And I can't pitch something that I know my colleagues won't want to buy.
Yeah. And so I guess
So
that's why you might find it harder to get an agent if
yes, the
you don't.
quality of what you're pitching, the quality of it, the marketability of it. And so let's say if your writing is an A plus, let's say your idea, your execution. So whether you're doing a nonfiction book or a novel, and either way, they're executed great. Your book proposal is great for a nonfiction. Your manuscript is well written. This is an amazing historical fiction novel. And now the third category is, well, what's her platform look like?
Right.
If Sophia has a platform and Dawn doesn't, and we both have A's in those first two categories, Sophia gets the agent.
Yeah. Yeah. And
If you have, yeah, you have to have, so going back to the platform, that becomes the tiebreaker. So if you and I both have great writing, we both have great ideas, the person with the best platform is ultimately the most promising to an agent because they believe, wow, she has great writing, good idea, great execution, and she has a platform. This is something that publishers want. I can definitely sell that. And she might be able to sell mine as well if my platform is smaller, but it definitely is going to be a conversation to be had. And maybe the agent, he or she may say, I'm going to continue to go forward because I personally really like it. But any rejections that come, more than likely, the lack of platform is definitely going to be a reason why somebody's going to pass.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, that's good to know. I think those are some really great points for people to bear in mind if they're looking for an agent.
And here's the thing. So even when you submit your fiction manuscript, when we talk about that editing, so we talk about the editing as far as like if you want to self-publish, but that still applies if you want an agent. An agent will still go through and say, oh, you know what, let's clean this up a little bit. But the version that you send the agent has to be as strong as if you were going to self-publish, because that's the sample of your writing. So you still have to go through that editing process with someone before you submit that manuscript to an agent, because that's your audition. So what they read is going to, if you don't say, oh, I'm not going to pay for an editor, I'm going to wait till I get a book deal and let them do that, and your writing is at like a C plus, that's the reason the agent says, I can't represent you, because they see you as a C plus. But if you work with an editor and you get it up to an A minus, they're like, oh my God, this is great. Because ultimately, whatever editor decides to acquire your work, the publisher is going to do editing anyway. So even if you think it's an A plus, by the time I've paid for an editor, I've got an agent, they made a couple of tweaks, and then I sent it to, even when you get a deal, the editor is still there's still more tweaking to be done.
Always, yeah. 9 rounds later.
But again, I think it's important to mention that even if a person is looking for an agent, that's all the more reason why you will not get an agent if your book isn't cleaned up and edited properly, because that's the sample of your writing. So if it's a C plus and you don't want to make it an A before you get to them, then most agents are going to decline on a C plus idea and the execution. Yeah.
Okay. That's a really good point. I think that's really
which means that you can't avoid an editor at all.
At
Doesn't
all.
matter which way you want to go. You might not need to hire a cover designer or a publicist, but no matter what direction you want to go, an editor is non-negotiable in publishing.
Okay. Right. I love that so much. Thanks for really stressing that.
Yeah, that's the soundbite. That's the soundbite right there.
That's the soundbite. Oh, trust me.
An editor is a non-negotiable.
Not negotiable. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I know over the years you have represented a lot of Black writers, writers of color, and just writers in all different types of genres. What do you think?
Is it about the industry at large?
It's about the industry at large, right? So I'm curious. I know that the publishing industry is still, especially in English-speaking countries. Let's talk about the US, UK, whatever. It's still a very
white space.
Yes, it is. Space. It's not very diverse. It's not very, it's very monochromatic, basically. It's a white industry for the most part. And that's part of the reason I actually started this, because I felt like I wanted to really put more Black writers out there. But I'd love to know what you see in terms of the publishing industry at large and that landscape for Black writers, both the good things and maybe the challenges that they may face in this industry.
So over the last few years, I mean, definitely over the last two since the pandemic and everything that happened with George Floyd and the national uprisings, more authors of color definitely have been getting more book deals, which is great, and the money has gotten a little better. But one of the things that I'm working on now is to create a speakers bureau as part of the division of the Literary Lobbyist to get Black writers to speak at HBCUs to talk about whatever their industry is in. But it started with the idea of wanting some of my authors to speak to students in journalism, English, and things of that nature about careers that they can have in publishing. The lack of diversity really starts from the assistant or intern level.
Okay.
If you cannot afford, publishing capital is in New York, and then a lot of companies have offices in LA and maybe like Tennessee. If you can't afford to intern for free during the school year or intern for minimum wage during the summer and live in New York, then you don't get the opportunity to get the internship. And if you don't get the opportunity to get the internship, then you're not in-house learning the culture, being able to sit in on meetings, meet authors. You don't get that opportunity. You're just somebody with a resume who has a desire to be an assistant editor one day. But if you don't do the internship, oftentimes the intern is the one that gets promoted to assistant editor.
Yeah.
So the lack of diversity starts literally at that first foot in the door. So for me, I think that it's important for Black authors, Black publishing professionals to go to HBCUs and even PWIs and speak to Black students about the career opportunities. So if you're a graphic designer, there's opportunities for you to do cover designs. You know, if you're communications, obviously you could be an in-house publicist, social media, marketing. But if Black students don't know about these roles and don't hear from Black people in these roles, then the next wave of new hires are not going to look like us. So ultimately, for me, I believe that it really starts with that junior level, and they just need to know that there's opportunities in book publishing, and they need to hear about those opportunities from people of color. Who are in those roles.
Who are already in those roles.
Yeah, so it definitely starts there on a basic level. Like, no one is going to invite you to dance at the party if you don't actually come to the party. So first, you just have to get yourself there. And I believe that starts from going from education and a level of mentorship. And then once you get in, it's really about establishing relationships and connections. I tell authors now, even if they're self-published, you should be making relationships with other authors in your genre. On Twitter, they started a hashtag publishing paid me. And that basically was all about authors sharing what their advances were. And how underpaid they were, and basically sharing that. So oftentimes, you know, Black people don't want to say how much money they're getting, but because somebody decided to get that hashtag going and it became a national conversation, articles were written about it. Now people are able to say, this author only got this, but her white contemporary got this. So now you as an author are more empowered. Your agent is more empowered to get you more money. And ultimately, we want to be paid well for the work that we do. So again, I think that anybody who's a person of color in publishing, yes, we want our white allies to help and find and hire the best candidates for the job. But I also believe that any person who is a person of color in publishing, whatever their position is, so whether you're an author, publicist, editor, graphic designer, you have to talk about what you do and invite other people to join into that industry. And again, I believe it starts with students, you know, and that's why I'm starting the HBCU Speakers Bureau, simply because if the next generation doesn't know, we'll forever be at that 1%.
Yeah.
Like if you're a graphic designer or an illustrator, you know, has anybody ever talked to you about getting into children's books? There's a lot of money to be made for illustrating children's books, you know, and then that can become merchandising. Like, you know, when people love the illustration of children's books, then we see dolls and things. Think about Dora the Explorer and the franchise that came from that. Whoever illustrated that is being paid for all of the things that come from that. That could have been a graphic designer at Jackson State. You know what I mean? But again, if somebody in publishing who does that has not had a conversation with those students, then maybe they're doing it for another company, but ultimately they never even considered working in book publishing, doing children's book illustration, because no one has ever told them that it even exists.
Yeah. And I think sometimes a part of the issue when you have an industry that is so white and so monochromatic is that sometimes you don't even see yourself there. You don't even think to yourself, like you may think rightly or wrongly so that there's no opportunity there for you. And so then that cycle just keeps perpetuating.
Right, you're thinking, oh, Black people don't do this. Yes, they do.
Exactly.
We do everything that everybody else does if that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
But again, if you don't see somebody doing it, you think that it's not open to us to do. And that's why I'm like, you know what, you guys, we have to, whatever you're doing. Like I have a client who is doing some ghostwriting now. And she was like, oh, you know, I didn't even realize that ghostwriting was a thing, that I could actually get paid writing other people's work. Because her thing is, you know, she does her own writing. And I was like, yeah, there's checks to be made. Do you think what celebrity do you think wrote their own memoir? When does Viola Davis have time to do that? When does Will Smith have time to sit down and, yeah, you might journal some things, but come on. Yeah. When did Gabrielle Union have time to sit down and write 2 books in the last 3 years? So again, that's a check waiting for somebody that is graduating Howard right now, who probably has a blog. They write for the school paper. They're an excellent writer. They have a couple of relationships. They don't even know that they could make hundreds of thousands of dollars writing celebrity books. Yeah. They don't know that they don't know, because no one has actually come to them and said, oh, you know, well, if you're not interested in authoring your own book, there is lucrative money to be made by being a ghostwriter. Yeah. For high level executives, for celebrities, for athletes, for politicians. Those people don't write their books. They don't have the time to. Even if they're good writers, they just don't have the bandwidth to do so. No, and then there's even opportunities within other fields. Like I know, you know, medical doctors are writing a book. Oh my God, yes. A lot of my clients write like medical journals and stuff. Journals, all those things. There's so many opportunities out there. I know you have to go shortly, but there are just a couple more questions that I want to ask you. One is, I'd love to know, you know, what's your proudest moment been throughout these last 19 and a half, I think you said, years? Oh my gosh, don't even make me choose one. Let's see. Let's have one or two, if you don't have to choose one, but No. Okay, yes. Proudest moment. Okay, let me think. Okay, well, you know what? I would have to say, I worked with a gentleman named Tracy Syfax, and he has a memoir, From the Block to the Boardroom. So Tracy, as a teenager and then in his early 20s, he had been incarcerated. So he did two stints. And when he came out, he was like, you know what? This time I'm not going back. So he wrote his story about what he did to keep himself out of prison and how he became an entrepreneur, gave tips in the back on interviews and where gentlemen can find suits and things of that nature. And he really became an advocate for ending recidivism. And he spoke in front of Congress to talk about ban the box, which is basically when you fill out a job application, it asks, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Yeah. So if you're honest, so when you're honest and you check that box, your application goes in the garbage. It doesn't matter what's on there after that. Once that box is checked, they don't even look at it. So he spoke in front of Congress with Congressman Cory Booker to get that removed from job applications nationwide. He also then was honored at the White House as a champion of change, because they actually every year do a theme. And that particular year, it was people who advocated for to end recidivism and to help people get second chances in life. So when I look at Tracy, he self-published his memoir, and I was his publicist for that. But I look at all that he's done, taking his lived experiences, self-publishing and putting them in the memoir, and then doing speaking engagements and connecting with communities. Ultimately, him writing a memoir and self-publishing, something he did for himself, winds up positively impacting an entire community and helping friends and families and nonprofits basically say we have to end this this prison pipeline. So when I look at all the authors that I've worked with, Tracy is somebody that really comes to mind, because what he started out doing for himself has ultimately changed and saved lives. And he was a self-published author, you know, and now he's happily married. He met his wife during the pandemic. They have an amazing story that's been featured in the New York Times and O Magazine. And now she is writing her memoir about ultimately how they came to be and the journey that she's been on as a cancer survivor, and then finding love online during a pandemic. Wow. over the age of 50. So when I look at him and just knowing that, you know, sometime in 2022, his wife is going to have a memoir out. So now looking at where he started, all that he's done, and then meeting this woman and now helping her get her book out there into the world, he's definitely someone that pays it forward. You know, and so yes, Tracy Syphax, the book is called From the Block to the Boardroom, but I would definitely say he is definitely one of my strongest relationships to date. But I'm so godly proud of him. So godly proud of him. Yeah.
Oh, that's an amazing story. I think I'm gonna drop all these books that you're recommending. I'm just gonna put them on the website because I love these so much. I'd love to know, what advice would you give a writer who is thinking about either writing a book or who's written one and who wants to publish? Like, what maybe one or two pieces of advice that you would give them from all of your experience working with authors over the years?
Yeah. So two sound pieces of advice that, again, will apply whether you're independently published or you go the traditional route. One is you really got to just do your research. So even if you want to go traditional, you still need to research agents. You need to research the type of deals that people are getting in your genre. You know, what type of books. You need to know the best sellers in your category so that you can compare and figure out where you fit in the industry. So every author needs to research. If you're self-publishing, you need to research and make sure that you understand the proper platforms to get your work out there. You know, is Kindle and Amazon and Ingram Sparks, what changes they make? So doing research will cost you a lot of money. I mean, will save you a lot of money when you're self-published. And then the next bit of advice I would give is don't allow yourself to emotionally connect to criticism. Criticism, whether somebody gives you a 1-star review or a 5-star review, that 1-star review is valuable because you need to know what people think. Now, you may not agree. I had an author who received a 2-star review when most people were giving her 5 stars. And for months, she harped on that 2-star review. She just couldn't stop talking about it. And I was like, you didn't write this book for that person. Like, don't obsess over this 2-star review when you have hundreds of 4- and 5-star reviews. But again, I think writers, you know, like Erykah Badu says, we're an artist, we're sensitive about our stuff.
Of course.
Don't let the criticism, because you're going to get reviews, you're going to get people to post in your comments. If you know that you're putting your work out there, first of all, putting your art out there is a form of vulnerability because you are opening yourself up to criticism. But none of us are right about everything all the time. So you take what you think might be applicable to you, and then the rest you just toss out, just like they tell celebrities, don't read the comments, you know, on these blogs and things of that nature, because it'll take you down a rabbit hole and make you feel horrible about yourself. So as a writer, I would say, emotionally separate yourself from criticism. And ultimately, if you want to be a best writer, a strong writer, if you want to be a best-selling author, then every form of criticism, even the bad stuff, there might be a sprinkle of validity to it. And if it's just straight trash, then throw it out as such. But don't let criticism, you know, don't let that seep into your brain and create imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
so
and derail you.
Yeah. So I think that researching and accepting criticism just for what it is, an opportunity to improve.
Yeah, I love that.
So those, I feel like because those are things connected to a mindset. All the rest of the stuff, there's always going to be someone like myself teaching you, and there's courses and things that you can take. But those two things, those are mindsets. You have to have the mindset to research and say, I'm really doing this. I really need to learn as much as I can before I spend money and put myself out there. And then just being able to separate from the feedback that you get emotionally.
Yeah.
You know, and if you can do that, I think everything else along the journey, you know, will be eventful and a great learning experience. And most oftentimes than not, it'll be a pleasant one.
Good. I love that. That's a really great piece of advice. Before we wrap up, tell us about publishing your pajamas. I love that. I love that name.
Okay.
And I've been curious about it ever since I saw it. So tell us about publishing your pajamas.
Publishing in your pajamas is something that I created because I had a heart for aspiring writers of color specifically. As an agent, I would go to conferences. People would pay to have me come and speak and teach and things of that nature. I would always get on social media, people in my DMs asking questions and advice, and can they talk to me and can they email me? But I wasn't seeing Black people showing up at these conferences. And I'm like, okay, is it that you don't have the time off from work? Is it that you don't have the money? Is it that you don't have childcare? What's preventing people of color from showing up at these conferences where I'm being hired to come in and speak and teach? So I saw that there was a disconnect, and I said, okay, you know what? if you don't have to worry about childcare, if you can stay at home, not have to worry about travel and hotel and still learn. So I said, you know what, how about we just stay in our pajamas and you can stay home and learn. So I basically started the conference in, what was it? I think 2018, 2019. And I basically did an all-day conference where I had different people come and speak and teach. And then I had 2 authors come and talk about their book. I interviewed them. But it was basically a one-day conference where everyone stayed home in the comforts of their home. Because if you don't have the resources to come to the information,
Travel.
listen, stay in your PJs, get yourself some coffee, eat your pancakes, and just get a notebook and be ready. And so that's something, and I started this pre-pandemic. So then obviously we go into the pandemic.
Everybody was in their pajamas during the pandemic.
I started this 2 years before the pandemic. 2 years before the pandemic. So again, for me, it was seeing Black people want to publish books. They want this information because they're asking me questions on social media all the time, but they're not showing up at these conferences. So whatever resources is preventing them from appearing at these conferences, let's remove that and everybody stay home. The speakers stay home, I stay home, and the attendees stay home, and we can learn together. So I'm going into my 3rd year of doing it, and now I do it basically as a series of courses and workshops. But again, we stay at home in the comforts of our home. And you can learn about publishing in your pajamas.
In your pajamas. And I love that because I'm in Barbados, and what would quite often happen is that I just can't, like, to travel
you can't come to the
all
States.
the way
Exactly.
to the States just for, you know, that's not always possible. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't too. And so I love the pandemic for that. I feel like I made so many, you know, even our
international relationships abound during the pandemic. Yes.
Yeah. And even Javasia, who I mentioned earlier, her community, I was able to join that when she moved it online.
Nice.
Birmingham. Nice. Right, exactly. So to me, having that online platform is just, personally, I think it's awesome. What are the dates?
Oh, so we have a workshop coming up in January 13th, and then I think January 20th. So there's one on children's book publishing, and then there's one on memoir writing. They will be available for replays, and the website is publishinginyourpajamas.com. And then throughout the year, I'm going to continue to like add more, but we're starting the month of January off with children's book publishing and marketing, and then how to write a memoir.
I love that. So what people need to do is get on your mailing list then, so that they
absolutely they can go to the literarylobbyist.com. All of that information is up there in the blog section, and then they can register for the courses on publishinginyourpajamas.com. But please get on the mailing list, the literarylobbyist.com. Right now, if you go to the website and my blogs, if you're a self-published author, I have a list of awards that accept self-published authors. I also have a database of media outlets that accept self-published authors. So I'm always giving digital freebies, and then ultimately those digital freebies become blogs. So right now you could definitely get the list of awards. And this year I've had 3 authors win 4 awards.
Love it. That's so good.
Yeah. So every year for the last 9-10 years, I've had indie as well as traditionally published authors win awards. So a lot of those awards are on that blog post. So I definitely encourage people to check that out.
Oh, I love that. So go over to literarylobbyist.com, check it all out. How can we follow you on social media?
Oh, the Literary Lobbyist on Instagram. On LinkedIn, I'm going to be very active on LinkedIn in 2022. Dawn M. Hardy. You can find me on LinkedIn as Dawn M. Hardy. No, my whole name, Dawn Michelle Hardy. And then even on Facebook is facebook.com/The Literary Lobbyist. Okay. So if you put in The Literary Lobbyist on social media platforms, even on Twitter, it'll bring you to me.
Okay, I love that. Thank you so much for dropping all knowledge, wisdom. This has been I think it's going to be such a great resource for.
Oh, thank you.
And if anybody wants a publicist, an agent, all the things that Dawn does, go find her on social media, find her on her website, follow her, not in the stalk read kind of way, but like
no, but and here's the thing. So I also offer consultations. So when people go to the Literary Lobbyist website, they can go in the drop down menu and actually schedule a consultation. And I talk to people specifically about, okay, what it is that you want to do, what challenges you're facing, and then I actually give them real life resources. So when the consultation is over, you know exactly what to do the next time you get on your computer. Yeah.
Love that. Well, again, thank you so much, Dawn.
You're welcome.
All of my guests that I've had so far, I'm like, I want to have them back. I want to have them back. So if I'm going to have you back, hopefully
listen,
we'll
you can have me back. We could do it live in Barbados from the beach. And I want some corn fritters and I want some rum punch. Yeah. What is it? Conch fritters? That's what I want. I want some conch fritters
and rum punch. Okay. Yes, we are going to organize something as soon as we get off the air. Maybe not as soon as we get off the air, but you like to come to Barbados. Next time we got to do this live for sure. I would.
Oh my goodness, girl. Yes. Thank you so much, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Appreciate you. And everyone, happy reading. Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the notes below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new episodes when they drop. And if this has inspired you to get your own writing project into the world, click on my website below and learn how you can work with me as a writing coach or an editor. Until next time, I send you big love from a small island.